Hi everyone. In this video, I'll go over a project that I've set up to understand CommonUI better, and it's a blueprint-only project and started from an empty Unreal project. In this project, I've set up CommonUI so it has a HUD, and then when you press escape, you have this pause menu, it pauses the game, and you can use all this input to go back, to continue, to quit. And as soon as you start using your gamepad, it switches to accordingly. So you can use the focus, you can use the B button for the back handler, and it'll go back to the game. And you will have input for your game again. I'll do an overview of the project and how to get it so that you can start exploring and see how I've set this one up. I pretty much just followed Unreal's documentation for CommonUI quick setup, and also lessons learned from Lyra and how they handle the HUD and the stack of activatable widgets. So yeah, I will just quit this. So this project is very small because it started with a fully empty project. So there's no starter content or anything. Okay, so what you'll want to do is you can click on the GitHub link that I've provided in the description, and then you can get this project by just clicking the code button, and then you can either download it as a zip folder and extract those files, or you can download GitHub Desktop and then you can just clone this repo so that you could always update it, or actually if you want to make changes to it, you could always fork this repository so you'd have your own version. Yeah, so just get the project and then just open up the U project. Just to make sure I capture the current state of the documentation, I am just going to put my project and the documentation side by side, and we'll go through every section. So this is just the first time walkthrough through CommonUI's core features. Yeah. So the first step we're going to do is just set up the viewport to support input routing. So from what I understand, this just means that this input routing will take care of whenever you're using a gamepad or a keyboard, or at least in this project, since I don't have support to switch and all that. So yeah, let's go ahead and go to Edit, Project Settings, and then under Engine, General Settings. Okay, so right here. So you'll see that the game viewport client class that I've set is the common game viewport client. Okay. And here it says you can always modify it yourself. That would be definitely in C++. Okay, so now we have our game viewport client set up. Okay, so the next step is to create an input action data table. So I'm just going to find my data table for that. And you'll see I am using a different name, or I don't think they actually specify in here. So for all the assets I've created, I've made sure to name them the same as Lyra or without the Lyra name, just so you can like match it up and compare and see how it's different or similar to Lyra. So mine is just called the universal actions, and I've placed it under all content UI. Okay. So the only row we have in this data table is just the default forward and the default back. So this just defines the default forward and back actions for your UI input handling. So the default back, I set it to the gamepad face, button right, and the escape key. And then the default forward, it just has none for the key. I think that's because the click is already handled but I have to double check. If someone knows the answer, please comment in this video. Okay, this one is the gamepad face button bottom. That is a hard thing to say. So yeah, the other part of the documentation mentions that you can also have input overrides. So in the case of the Switch, the Nintendo Switch, if you want to override the yes option or the default forward option, you would pretty much set it in this right here. So I don't have the option for the Switch because I don't have the Switch as a platform. Okay. Um, yeah, so these UI widget map these abstract actions to actual inputs. We'll use it in our next step, which is getting the default navigation action set up. So in this one, we just need a CommonUI input data file. So I don't think I made any changes. Ah, that's what it was. Okay, I'm just going to close this. And so the next step is just the common input data. So this asset, this is where you actually set or you use the data table you just created just to set the default click action and the default back action. Okay, let's scroll down. Next is the controller data bindings. And those ones I migrated from Lyra because there's a lot of assets, pretty much the graphic representation of your keys and what corresponds to what. So that one is in the content and then UI, and I think it's foundation, platform, input, and then those are all the ones I got from Lyra. So as an example, the Xbox One, if you open that one, it has all the information for the brush data map. So this is what your UI will pull when it knows it's, let's say, it's, I'll try to find the UI we are actually going to use. So yeah, the A button maps to this and it maps to the input. And then to compare the keyboard and mouse. Okay, keyboard and mouse. It has like the mouse axes, the special button. And then for the mouse, you don't need too much graphics because a lot of time the buttons you can click on it to confirm. Okay, so those are the assets you can use. And let's say you had the Switch or you were supporting the Switch also, then you'd have the graphics in here too, set as the Switch controller. Or even if you had the Joy-Cons. Okay, so we have the graphics for controller data. Next, we can also define common styles for our widgets so that our buttons always look have the same style, the text has the same style, the same font. Yeah, in this one, I think I put them in, yeah, in foundation text. So I'm using Roboto, size 24. So this is style I could use in any like text field for the widgets. And I think I have a few buttons styles. Yeah. So a clear style and a primary style. So what the clear style, it pretty much gets rid of the default button that like Unreal has. So it's clear and you can set it all through the widget itself that represents your button. Okay, so this is what this all goes on. And there's also a section where you can set your default styles. So that is inside your project settings, plugins. Okay, and then it's in CommonUI editor. So those are the basic templates I get. if I don't set anything. Yeah, there's a few other project settings you can navigate to. There's uh, a default material for when something is loading, or when we have a common load guard widget um, that Lyra uses, and this is also from Lyra, the Throbber base. Um, yeah, I think this one Lyra uses to set the input so that the escape action always has focus. I had to do a little differently in this project because I wanted to keep it blueprint only, and a lot of the input action router stuff is not exposed to blueprints. Oh yeah, so that's what I went through. So the default throbber, or you can have like a placeholder for UI assets that have not been yet loaded. So that again is here. I didn't set anything here, but you could set, it's just a texture. So a texture that's also not heavy, so it doesn't have to load as well. Yeah, so that's all the Quickstart covers. Another thing I didn't cover is that your common input data, the blueprint we created, we put it inside the uh, game common input settings. Okay, and this is how your default input is chosen. So on Windows, the default input type is mouse and keyboard. If you wanted to default to gamepad, then you can choose that here. If you want to not support the mouse and keyboard, you can uncheck this. Or if you don't want to support gamepad, you uncheck this. And yeah, this also determines you can swap out, or you can start using your gamepad or just your keyboard and mouse. And this is where we link all the controller data that has all the textures and their associated action. And another thing I checked on is allow out of focus device input. Lyra had it on, and it seems to help with focus issues. Okay, so I will maximize my project, and I don't need the project settings anymore. I'm just going to explain how I set up the input and our HUD. So it all starts with the player controller. Yeah, this would be nice to use the enhanced input system, but since I wanted to just focus on CommonUI, I just made the easiest or simplest setup I could possibly do, which is just listening for the escape key or the gamepad special right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So whenever your player controller is spawned, it creates your UI layout widget. Yeah, let's just navigate to that one. I'm just going to open it up. So this is your overall UI layout, and it's a common user widget, and it essentially holds all the stacks of your UI, of activatable widget stacks. So activatable widgets are widgets that you can activate or deactivate. So instead of collapsing them, it's just a nicer way of dealing with widgets. So Lyra has 4 different stacks. I just kept the game layer stack and the game menu stack. So the game layer is where I decided to put my HUD, and then the game menu stack is where I decided to add the pause menu. And the lower on the stack, the lower in the hierarchy of the overlay, this is the higher it'll be. So if I put my menu below the game, or on top of the game layer stack, then it would go behind the HUD. Yeah, and pretty much the only logic I added to it is logic that's in C++ in Lyra. So on the whenever this is initialized, so whenever this is created by the player controller, it just registers these two layers to this layer map, which is, yeah, so it's essentially going to be this UI layer game has this widget, and this tag has that widget, so that if you call push widget to layer stack, it will push the widget to the right layer. So let's say you have a modal that says, are you sure, okay or not? Then you would know to push that to the modal stack, so it's at the right Z order, or it stacks correctly. Okay, so these layers are registered, and then it adds this to the viewport, and it sets it as this variable called root layout. And then it pushes the HUD to the layer game. Okay. And then if you press escape or gamepad special right, then it pushes the pause menu to the game menu. So then that widget would be on this stack. Okay, so let's go over this. Oh, I left some unhooked nodes. I will change that. Okay. I'll make sure to push that before sharing. Live coding. Or live blueprinting. So our HUD layout class, we'll just open that one. So yeah, our HUD, I essentially just put a overlay with the color, and it has a canvas panel. You could have like health, heart, a reticle, all that. But I just kept it really simple, just to show that it exists and it's stacked correctly. So there's not much to our HUD in this project. But yeah, let's get back to this here. So whenever this pause menu is pushed to the layer stack, oh, let me undo some of that. I still need myself. Okay. Okay. So yeah, when you push your widget to the layer stack, so we want the input mode to be game and UI at that point. And then we pause the game. So let's navigate to the pause menu. Okay. So this is the pause menu. It uses some common buttons, and I'll go over those too. And it essentially just binds on click to an action. And to see these events, I had to make sure that these widgets or the menu button were variables, so that we can then set up some events. So whenever this is clicked, we deactivate this widget. And whenever the quit button is clicked, we just quit the game. So on this widget being deactivated, first we make sure that the player controller is valid. So let's say you quit the game, the player controller will not be valid anymore. And then we just set the game to the input mode to game only, and we hide the cursor, and we unpause the game. Next, I want to go over how the menu buttons work, and how the A or the B or whatever key, how it shows up. And then after that, I'll go over the bottom action bar and how that works. Yeah, so these buttons are a widget. So click on that, and then you'll be directed to the menu button. This is very similar to what Lyra has. The most important part of this for it to work is to have the input action widget, which is also a blueprint I've created. Its parent is common action widget. And yeah, so what this does is it will take whatever action is bound to it, and it will get the icon for it. So the input action is default forward, which is the face down button. And another thing I noticed is that if you call it exactly input action widget, it will handle the selection correctly. So when you scroll up and down, when you're with your gamepad, so scroll up and down, it will make sure that the action widget is only visible on the currently selected button. You'll notice sometimes that it feels like the input is stuck to the viewport. So what you want to do is either you just click on the quit game, or you can always do Shift F1. And so that's what they say up there. Click for mouse control, or Shift F1 for mouse cursor, just so you can see your cursor. This button, it has a few overridden functions. So on click, I'd play an animation, very simple animation. Same with on selected. This again, you can also see the example in Lyra. Yeah. So actually those animations, I can show where they are. In your designer tab, you can navigate to, I'll close it because I already have it open. So yeah, it'll be at the bottom of your window. It's just animations. And then you have the animation for unhovered. So if I press, I can see what that looks like. So very simple animation, nothing fancy like Lyra has. And then on press, it just gets darker. Okay. So that's pretty much it for the menu button. On event construct, I set the text, which is just the button text. So the continue button has that text here. Quit button has that text. So it doesn't show up right here, but it does when you play, or when the UI gets constructed. Okay, and then the next thing we have in the pause menu is the bottom action bar. So that one is also a widget, and it's based on just the common user widget, but it uses this common bound action bar. Yeah, which in turn uses the bound action button. Okay, so this is the blueprint for what your back action would look like, or if you had any other bound action button, that's what it would look like. This one also has a few animations. They're pretty much the same ones that the other one I had, but you can get really fancy with your animations, and you have full control of what you want your buttons to look like. And then you can use them everywhere. Okay, so your bound action is parent class's bound action button. And again, we are using the input action widget, and just make sure that's the same name. And this class has some logic to show or hide this input action widget based on if you have the gamepad on or off. And if you navigate back to your pause menu, so the magic happens in the, just make sure you have the pause menu selected, and then in the back category, if you have is back handler turned on, that just means that you can use the bound back input, so escape or the face right button, to deactivate this widget and go back to the previous focus. And another part is that you can check on if the back action is displayed in the action bar. So this, what it will do is that if you have a action bar, and we do, it will populate it with the action for back. So yeah, this CommonUI handles a lot of stuff, and it's great that Epic is adding documentation And even just today, looking at the documentation, I saw that it was already updated. Um, yeah, so I hope this project helps you as much as it did for me to help me understand how Common UI works, how to set it up. Um, you could definitely migrate uh, these widgets and pretty much anything in this project to your own project. And then all you'd have to do is just make sure that you have the same project settings for the Common UI setup that I have in the start of this video. So yeah, you can also use this project, add to it. I think maybe in the future I'll try to go over setting up a settings screen with tabbable widgets like Lyra has. Um, yeah, it's been nice creating something from a clean project, but it's also always great to look at Lyra as reference. Um, its own common UI classes, uh, or their classes that are derived from common UI, have a lot of helpful things. So one thing that's the biggest thing that's a difference in this project that I couldn't implement in Blueprint is, or had to do it another way, is how we set the game input. So Lyra's activatable widgets, um, they have uh, an enum for setting what the focus should be. So game UI, UI only, or I forget exactly what the enum is. But the only thing that's exposed to Blueprint is the button itself. It overrides that focus in our class defaults. Yeah, in our class defaults, in the input section, in the advanced section, you can see their input mode override, and it sets it to menu so that the input is only received by the UI. But then there's nowhere else that we can set this back to the game in a Blueprint only project, which is too bad. So in this case, this is why we weren't using the uh, Common UI's input mode, but we are still using or just making sure our player controller has the right input. So that's definitely something that is great about Lyra's activatable widgets. So yeah, there you have it, an overall explanation of how this project works and how it's set up. I hope you found value in just digging in and seeing how things are set up and improving it. And yeah, I'm finding that Common UI solves a lot of focus issues. It's definitely amazing to have that support for the input routing, so the gamepad input, updating the UI, and the UI knowing which key to show. It's incredibly useful. It's great that it's starting to get more documentation. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful for you. I first thought about showing it from scratch with nothing, like starting from an empty project, but it definitely had a lot of steps to it. So if that's something that viewers want, that I could eventually do. Um, but for myself anyways, I always find it useful, and I learn better if I'm just digging around, trying things out, and it's always great to have examples. So yeah, thanks for watching.